I want you to picture Jesus' disciples. Picture what they looked like. Because I want to ask you a question. Were the disciples 30-year-old bearded men? Is that what you were picturing? Because the answer is no. 11 of the 12 disciples were between the ages 13 and 19 years of age. So maybe they had some beards, but oftentimes we think that they are the same age of Jesus. Every movie, every TV show, every painting that depicts Jesus and his disciples, I've always seen, first of all, Jesus is usually far too white, and secondly, his disciples are usually 30-year-old bearded men. Now, nothing against those depictions. Many are amazing, but it's not entirely accurate. Let me show you why Scripture points to 11 of the 12 disciples being 12 to 19 years old. Exodus 30, verse 13. It talks about a tax that you have to pay to get into the temple. According to the sanctuary shekel, or the temple tax, which weighs 20 gerahs, this half shekel is an offering to the Lord. All who cross over, those 20 years old or more, are to give an offering to the Lord. The rich are not to give more than a half shekel, and the poor are not to give less when you make an offering to the Lord. Now, Matthew 17, verse 24. After Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax, the one we just read about, came to Peter and asked, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" Verse 27, Jesus responds, "So that we may not cause offense," talking to Peter, "go to the lake, throw out your line, take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours." Let's do a little bit of a repeat. How many drachma coins did you need to pay the temple tax? 2. How many coins did they need? 4. How many people does that pay for? 2 people. How many disciples are there? 12. 13 if you count Jesus. So, 11 of the 12 disciples didn't pay the tax. Why? There's only one biblical explanation. Because 11 of the 12 disciples were under the age of 20. So this lines up with Scripture, but does it line up with the history and the culture of the ancient Jewish people? Another reason we know they're younger than the age of 20 is because in this culture at 18, you were usually given a wife. The only one that's mentioned to have a wife is Peter, who would be over the age of 20. Does this line up with what we know about Jewish education? We know that they were young because in Jewish culture, this is the breakdown of their education. Scripture studies begin at age 5. The study of the Mishnah, or the oral Torah, starts at age 10. At age 13, they began rabbinical study, and at age 15, this is important, they were either concluding their studies unless they were chosen to be tutored by a rabbi. If you were accepted by a rabbi, then you would learn until you were 30 and become a rabbi yourself. If you weren't chosen to be tutored by a rabbi didn't accept you, then schooling was done for you and you would usually find work in your family trade. So, Jesus began his ministry when he was 30 years old, the age of a typical rabbi. Remember, the disciples called him Rabbi. Now, look where he finds his disciples. Matthew 4:21, going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and his brother John, and they were in the boat fishing with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. When you understand the culture, it's so clear that the disciples were young, and it makes a lot of sense. I'm going to tell you some things the disciples did, and you let me know if it sounds like teenagers. They argued about who would be the greatest among them. Jesus told them to pray, and they fell asleep. James and John get their mom to ask Jesus for them if they can sit at his right and left. John is lying at the chest of Jesus at the Last Supper, which is weird for a 30-year-old man to be lying in the chest of another 30-year-old man, but it makes sense if you believe that Jesus was a 30-year-old rabbi and John, his youngest disciple, might have been 12 to 14 years old. So he's laying on the chest of who he probably considered a father figure. When they went out 2 by 2, Jesus puts Peter and John together because as a pastor of the youth, I'm going to put the oldest student with the youngest student, just like Jesus, Peter and John together. If you personally want to look like Jesus, a good place to start is to have a bunch of 13 to 18-year-olds around you, following you, and asking you questions all the time. The disciples were not 30-year-old bearded men. They were 12 to 19 years old. When Jesus wanted to change the world, he chose teenagers to do it. Do we see teenagers as just future leaders, or do we look at them as current world changers?